All right, let's move on to higher education. We have questions from viewers very concerned about the status of higher education. We have had guests on in the preceding weeks who've talked a little bit about enrollment declines in the Minnesota state system and also at the university. University of Minnesota has a very large budget request. Um, and of course, we also have this issue of what to do, if anything, with the university hospital system as a result of the potential, although not yet consummated, merger with the Sanford Health Systems and Fairview. Senator Lucero, let's start with you. Higher education generally, budget issues, priorities. What can you tell us about that?
Sure, absolutely. To college, multiple colleges, university, over 12 years myself. Then I taught college for 7 years prior to getting into the legislature here. So higher education is definitely a passion. Education, whether it be K through 12 or higher education, is certainly a high priority for me. So when it comes to higher education, the thing that we are witnessing now of people and the decline, I don't know what the direct cause. I'm not a member of the higher education now, but what the larger conversation that I've had over the years, and prior, has been the skyrocketing cost relationship of the cost of education versus the reward. And so there are many types of careers that universities, colleges offer that degrees that don't have a value or aren't marketable in the real world. And so when students go for these degrees, whether it be a major or a minor, and they're tens of thousands of dollars and sometimes over $100,000 in debt, and they don't have a degree that's marketable or a skill set that an employer is willing to pay for, that's a concern. There is an awareness that the trades and skilled positions are high paying and in high demand. And many of these roles can be obtained with a simple 2-year degree. And that's where people are gravitating to as the demand for these roles continue to increase, and the high paying salaries that accompany them. Again, I think it's going to be a challenge for many of these universities, colleges that continue to operate in a brick or mortar sense, because there's another factor we've seen with COVID. Being that I'm in IT and that I do technology for a living, we exponentially moved down the curve of being remote, and these capabilities of an education is among those. And I think that there is going to be a learning curve that needs to happen in these higher education institutions of offering the courses in a remote capacity rather than the traditional brick and mortar, because brick and mortar is expensive. You have HVAC, you have depreciation that needs to happen, upkeep, and there is, I think, a challenge that they're going to have to accompany.
Senator Boldon, higher education issues.
Yeah, I appreciate this topic. Education is something that is really important to me. I have a master's degree in nursing education and have experience in that as well. As I talk to young people in my community, what I often hear is concerns about the high cost of higher education and not wanting to take on a massive student loan debt that they'll take on with them for years, perhaps decades to come. I also will just note, as we talk about decreasing enrollment, in my community, the University of Minnesota Rochester actually has not experienced that. They actually continue to see increasing enrollment. And I think part of the reason for that is they have some creative programs and affordable programs and programs specific to largely healthcare careers, which there's a huge need for that, and so they're able to get into the field of their choosing, and then get to work and make a good wage. And so moving forward, I think we have to address the high cost, or we're going to continue to see declining enrollment. There's a bill in the Senate around free tuition, and the details of it have changed already since it has been introduced, and so but the concept is really around making education more affordable for more folks. the last thing I will say, just as you mentioned, the merger with Stanford in the HHS committee several weeks ago, we had an excellent hearing about this, and it was a packed room, and we actually had several former governors come to testify. It was extremely informative and brought up, I think, for probably nearly all of us on the committee, some really significant concerns about what is happening with that, and there will be continued conversations about really what can be and should be done with that.
Yeah, I think that hearing is famous for the only recent opportunity that former Governor Dayton and former Governor Pawlenty spoke at that same hearing. It doesn't happen every day. So Representative Heintzeman, higher education issues, also the merger question, Stanford, University of Minnesota, and the academic health center piece of that. Your thoughts on all of that?
It's a large subject area, and I'll try to cover some of the ground that maybe hasn't yet been discussed. Affordability is such an important piece of higher education, and with 6 kids ranging in age from 21 all the way down to 6, this is a topic of discussion, no question, at my house. And all 3 of my older children have really appreciated the PSEO program. For those that might not be familiar, that's your post-secondary enrollment option. And here's a news flash: if you're going to work on a family level, work on affordability, your junior and senior year, your students are eligible to attend a Minnesota State campus at no charge, rather than those K through 12 dollars. Following the student into the high school program, they can follow a student over to a Minnesota State campus, and it's just been absolutely huge. And the other part of that that's interesting is not only can they apply those dollars towards a Minnesota State campus, they can also apply them towards other institutions. And that's something that I want to mention specifically because we have had the higher ed bill moving along and was heard yesterday. And there was unfortunately language that prohibited those dollars from following kids into an institution that had a statement of faith, Barry. So if that's ringing any kind of question marks in people's minds in terms of a constitutional question, you're on the right track, because I guarantee you if that legislation moves through our current process and becomes law in Minnesota, that will be challenged. Absolutely convinced of that. You can't exclude an institution simply because it has a statement of faith. And think about this, Barry. If for example, you have a student that walks onto a campus that may be one of those institutions, and they never take a class that even touches faith, yet simply because the institution has a statement, they're now excluded from receiving dollars. That's shocking to me. So, that's a concerning area. On the positive, Representative Pawlowski, who is a chair of the Higher Ed Committee in the House, has done, I think, a really good job of getting at some of the needs in the Minnesota State program, and then also addressing some issues at the University of Minnesota in terms of funding. And we do have a surplus, so now might be an opportunity to do that. We'll see if the language comes through in conference committee from those conversations after the fact. But that's kind of where things currently lay in terms of funding and some of the pros and cons as I see it.
Representative Heintzeman, I'm wondering if you've seen. Go ahead, Senator Boldon. Yes, you go ahead first. And
sorry, I just wanted to chime in on the. I appreciate it. I just wanted to chime in on the PSEO piece to just clarify the language, at least on the Senate side, around that says that PSEO dollars cannot be used. Students can still attend entities that are, religious schools. It just says that those schools cannot use a statement of faith as part of the admission process. So what it keeps from happening is discrimination actually against folks who may not share the faith, don't have can't agree, can't attest to that faith statement. An example of some of those questions are, tell us about your relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, a student who is Jewish or Muslim, is not going to have an answer to that question, and that cannot be used as a reason to not accept them into that school. So it really is just a mechanism to not allow discrimination for those students, and they still can go to those schools. There just can't be a sort of a barrier for accept as part of the acceptance process. So I just want to clarify.
Representative Heintzeman, I want to go back to you just very briefly. Senator Boldon touched on the U Academic Center business. We had a lot of press coverage a month ago. Two former governors testifying we need to do something about it. Disputes about whether it's $1 billion or $500 million. Has there been any progress on that from a legislative standpoint? Any news on that that we can tell our viewers?
Thank you for the chance to respond, Barry. And on that specifically, I don't have anything to report beyond what has already been mentioned. And you might have covered a few of the high level headlines in terms of those attending in some of the conversations. I would mention though that when we're getting back to this PSEO discussion, that there's plenty of things that students of faith may find objectionable in a secular institution, but we don't exclude them from being able to actually participate and attend simply because there's something there that might be offensive to them as one faith or another. We allow people to have an open discussion and dialogue about these kinds of things. And rather than excluding an institution, I think that it's better to let everyone kind of figure out where they lay on these issues and make decisions for themselves.